What is up, watch fam? I am Christian, the curator of the Theo and Harris watch shop, and today I'm going to be reviewing a pretty incredible watch collection from Rolex and Tudor into the worlds of Patek Philippe, maybe FP Journe, so stay tuned. Boom, watch fam. All right, before we get into it, a quick wristwatch check. I am wearing the newest watch into my personal collection, the Cartier Tank American. American was one I used to have. This is a Centre, very close, not the same. It's lovely. It's from the 1950s. The condition is pretty exceptional. Got some blemishes in the crystal, which I'll have to take care of, but I'm trying to enjoy this thing first. Beautiful deployant buckle as well. I'm in love with this watch. I'm wearing it basically constantly. So I'm sure that if you guys have ever bought a watch you've loved immediately, you know what I'm feeling, you know I can't take it off. So let's get into it. So today's watch collection comes from a Theo and Harris fan, Demian. He is an American first generation. His parents are from Venezuela, and now he travels all over the world with work, and we'll get into that in a second. And in his travels, he's just built this passion, this deep passion for watches, specifically in Switzerland. So I'm going to read a part of the email that he sent me because I thought that it was just, perfect foundation, because I think that it was great, and I want to start the story, with his words. So let's do it. I didn't come from a line of watch collectors. My dad did not own a luxury watch, nor did I sit close to my grandfather as he set his timepiece. I'm a first-generation immigrant to the US, and luxury timepieces had no place in our home. In fact, the reason I am now into watches is because long after my education, my first jobs and careers, I found my profession as a US diplomat. I love this job, and I am so proud to represent my country. 6 years ago, I was posted in Switzerland. Imagine that. I had never expected to get into watches, but now I could not escape them, skiing, or chocolate. I saw these shiny things on people's wrists, even teenagers wearing inherited Rolex watches on the city tram. In fact, a Swiss coworker mentioned to me that their Rolex is a simple watch. Of course, I still had no understanding of wristwatches, but Rolex began to become something I aspired to. Fast forward to today, and I have the watch collection in front of you. It has taken a lot of hard work and dedication as I have worked up this collection slowly, small upgrade at a time. I think that's great. Right? If any of you guys out there are like me, lucky enough to have one of these, really cool stories where, your dad gets you into watches or your grandpa, and so many people do, it's a great feeling, and we know that. But I think one of my favorite parts about my job, and Demian found watches before he found Theo and Harris, but still the point remains, you get to evangelize. Right? The whole idea is to find new watch geeks, right? To not only help people, but to witness their journey from, either Daniel Wellington or literally nothing, right? Like even Anna, right, who's behind the camera right now. When we met when we were in college, she didn't know a watch could be more than $100. And now while she won't give herself credit for it, she knows more about watches than a lot of people, right? And that to me is so interesting. So no, not everyone is born into watches. I certainly wasn't born into watches the way that so many other people that I know were, right? Sons and grandsons of watchmakers and Patek executives, etc. Anyway, the beginning of our story in many ways lays the foundation for the rest of our collection forever. But our passion can't be inherited. Someone has to introduce it to you in some way. And I know you guys will agree once we start talking about his watches, you found watches in one of the most amazing ways possible, right? In the home. So let's start off with your first watch. It's an Armand Nicolet that he bought in 2013. He paid $2,500 for it, which Demian said, and I can absolutely relate. The first time you spend that kind of money on a watch, you're like, why did I just do that? What was that decision? Our watch is worth more than $5. I knew when I was looking at my first Rolex, I loved it, but I was like, okay, this is still a little bit uncomfortable. Now, of course, 5 years later, we all say, oh, those were the days, But anyway, it was a very cool watch. It's not a brand that I know much about. But listening to Demian's story about it, it was quite interesting. It's actually powered by an old pocket watch movement from the late 50s. I've seen other brands do the same thing, and I just find it pretty interesting. And certainly you, Demian, owe Armand Nicolet quite a bit, because that piece is the bedrock of your collection in so many ways. It started the journey we're embarking on. From there, as he mentioned before, he dreamed of owning a Rolex. And that Rolex was the Batman. It's no secret, I love the Batman. I think that it was such an original take on the traditional GMT. And you, being someone who actually does work in international business as a US diplomat, it makes perfect sense. It's the perfect complication. And to make the moment, which you afforded with much sacrifice, as you mentioned, more special, your first son was just born. And being able to share that kind of moment, I know obviously your son at the time didn't know, but still, a watch that represents that moment in your life is so special, and I certainly will be investing in one if I'm ever so lucky. From the GMT, he moved into a Tudor Black Bay Red. It was 2014, and I gotta commend you for even being so forward-thinking at the time. Tudor was not the brand they are today. They had just relaunched into the world, and while now Tudor, and they do a great job, while Tudor could release basically anything and people will buy it today, at the time Tudor didn't have the re-earned brand equity yet. So you were probably a little bit ahead of the curve. And I really do like the original Black Bay Red. The original logo, that rose is super vintage and cool. And I know that while you had your eye on another Rolex, the budget really just wasn't there at the time. And that's a great reason to buy a Tudor. And that's a great void that Tudor fills. You get a lot of that Rolex bang for a fraction of the price. But you inevitably did get that next Rolex, which was the white dial Rolex Daytona ceramic. Great pick. He got on the list as soon as the watch was released in 2016, and then 1 year later, while Demian was in Canada, he got the call from his AD in Switzerland that the watch was ready, so he picked it up. I remember in 2016 and 2017 thinking, wow, is this hype gonna last? How long will it last? I definitely wouldn't have imagined that 4 years later in 2020, people would still be paying a basically 2x premium on the Daytona. It's unbelievable. And I know that puts a bad taste in people's mouths around the Daytona. It doesn't matter to me. Still, the fact remains, while I probably won't be buying one, it's impossible to ignore how cool the ceramic Daytona is. From the Daytona, Demian went back into Tudor for a special release that Tudor did with his authorized dealer, the authorized dealer that had gone far out of their way for him to get him certain watches, and he picked up the Tudor Black Bay Bronze Bucherer Blue. Very cool watch, of course redundant with the Black Bay Red, but I think it is really nice that this watch was a sign of appreciation to his AD. Now his next piece is super interesting and something that was very different than anything else that Demian had bought or even seemingly considered before it. The next piece is a Rolex Explorer, reference 1016. The watch dates to 1972, and he bought it after he was actually called by one of the watchmakers at the Rolex authorized dealership. The watchmaker basically said, hey, I just finished up the work on this watch at $9,500 at the time. This is a good price. Buy it. He trusted his watchmaker and pulled the trigger. One of the funny things that Demian told me about this watch is that, in his circles, no one recognizes it. No one thinks that it's all that interesting or cool, but in the vintage watch circles, there are very few watches under $30,000 that are going to get you as much praise as a vintage 1016. The 36 millimeter case is phenomenal. The matte dial is so good. Yours has the custard tritium. For my wrist, it fits way better than the Submariner, and I think it's a lovely watch. Really well done with that one. His next piece was a GMT Master Pepsi on a Jubilee bracelet. Again, and we'll get into this in a minute, redundant with the Batman certainly, but as he mentioned, far more dressy than the Batman. Speaking of pretty rich, dressy watches, here's an incredible Royal Oak. A reference 14700, 36 millimeters, not just cased in 18 karat yellow gold, but with a matching champagne dial. This is pretty mint. I'm a big fan of these watches. I've owned quite a few of them and I've enjoyed them. I sold one a couple of years ago to a client and I regret it every day. I would absolutely buy it back from him. I'd put it in my personal collection and I would never sell it. But what are you gonna do? Demian's next watch is a big boy. It's a Patek 5168 Aquanuat, white gold, blue dial. It has a pretty substantial 42mm case, but as your first Patek, this was a hell of a choice. And your AD really did you a pretty big favor by getting you this watch, because these pieces are in pretty high demand, trading at significant premiums over retail. What's so special about Demian's story with this watch is, at this point he was based in Africa, and he flew back to Switzerland to pick up the watch. Spent 3 weeks on vacation with his wife, and I cannot think of a better way to spend a 3-week vacation than with, at this point, your Grail watch, something that you never thought you'd ever own, and having a cocktail and looking at the incredible views and just kind of looking down and just being happy to be alive. That's just such a great moment. This watch was released to celebrate the Aquanuat's 20th anniversary, and it coincided with Demian's 10-year anniversary with his wife. So, kind of the stars were aligning on this one. So, those are Demian's watches, but now it's my time to actually do some work to figure out what he should be selling and where he should be going with his collection. In his own words, Demian wants 5 watches, a small focused collection of badass watches. So I think he's off to a good start, and he's actually on the waiting list for a couple of pieces. The 15202 in white gold with the honey dial, an FP Journe Resonance 2020, a Patek Philippe Nautilus reference 5711, another FP Journe, this time the Aquanuat blue, and finally Reshepi's Chronomet Contemporain, which is a watch that we recently spoke about in great acclaim. What I think is so cool, about Demian's collection, where it is and where it seems to be going, and he did mention this, is he's found a really new appreciation for independence. He feels like we really all should when we consider buying independent. There is a great allure in investing in one of these small independent watch manufacturers. You're actually making a difference, in their lives. Of course, at the moment, it seems like Reshepi is becoming quite famous, and it's going to be hard to get a watch. And if you don't take the spot, someone else will. But the fact remains, you're a bit of a patron of the arts when you buy an independent watch manufacturer. FP Journe has become a larger company, now funded. So again, am I making a difference by going in there and buying a watch that 1 million people would take as well? No, not really. But it does begin to shift culture. If we can create a culture in this community that is more willing to buy and support independence, that would be a wonderful, wonderful thing. And the whole community will be rewarded with more interesting work, things that are less cookie cutter. So I am very strongly, behind independence. I think that that's an amazing thing coming from you, Demian, who has built this collection of, while great, very mainstream watches. And there's nothing wrong with that. But you obviously had a bit of an epiphany. He mentioned that he's been kind of driven away by all this weightless nonsense in the watch industry. So I definitely commend you for that. But now let's talk about your watches, the lists you're on, and really where you need to be to find this perfect 5-watch collection. So at the moment, you have 3 brand new Rolexes, and I think you really only need 1. So you got to choose between them. The way to do that, I think, would be to start off with, put all your emotions aside. Put aside the fact that the Batman was your first Rolex. Put aside the fact that the Daytona is twice the price of either. Just look at the watches themselves. Which one of those watches fits best on your wrist? Which one do you wear most often? Which one do you genuinely derive the most pleasure from? Because obviously you've invested a lot of money into this collection. And if it is the Daytona that you genuinely like the best for its proportions, its history, its design, versatility, then I don't even think you should consider the fact that it's double the price. Right? At this point, you're already in for so much money, and I wouldn't settle for the one you like second best over 10,000 bucks. Now, that being said, the Daytona is a, black, white, and steel watch. Do you actually enjoy having the colors of the, let's say, Pepsi, or, and this is perfectly acceptable, do you feel genuinely emotionally attached to your Batman? Because I only think you need 1 new Rolex. And if I had 5 vintage Rolexes right now, one of them being my original Datejust, and let's say it was the least valuable watch on the table, I would choose my original Datejust because I have such an emotional connection to it. So I think you need to audit those 3 Rolexes and where you are and pick just 1. Now the second category would be, the beater. I don't love the term beater because I don't recommend anyone beats their watch up. But the beater is a great spot in the watch box. It's the watch that you don't have to worry about. Of course, you don't want any of your watches to get beat up or scratched. But the reality is that some activities in life, whether it be fishing or yard work, whatever it might be, do have higher likelihoods of small little accidents. And it's great to have one great watch that you feel comfortable wearing in scenarios like that. For me, that's my Breitling Super Ocean Heritage. It's a great watch, it's a durable watch, and while I hope I never, put a real nick in it or scratch in it, I know that that watch can take it, and I would embrace that. Whereas, let's say if I was wearing my dad's, solid gold Datejust, I would feel sick to my stomach. And you have two watches that compete there. And those are your two Tudors. And I would absolutely go with the bronze. Now, while I really love and enjoy the Tudor Black Bay Red, the bronze is one, a very cool watch, alternative material and everything. But two, it does represent a beautiful relationship between you and your AD. And it sounded like that meant a lot to you, so I'd keep that. Next, I do think you need a dress watch. And it's something that you're already floating around, whether it's the Zeron or the Rocheppe. I clearly have a love affair with Rocheppe right now. I haven't been able to hold one in the metal, and that's probably part of what's adding to this mystery. But that being said, you can't go wrong with a Zeron. Whether you do something more simple, like even a Souverain in a white metal or a rose, but I would definitely go independent. Another brand you can look at, and they're pretty expensive, but just to maybe get the kind of juices flowing, would be ADC, Atelier de Chronométrie, a lovely brand based in Barcelona, I believe. I absolutely love their designs. Again, super small shop, super independent. With this dress watch category, I wouldn't even compromise. I would absolutely go independent. This is your opportunity. Moving on to vintage. I have to ask you the question. It seems like you love your Explorer, and it's a watch certainly worth loving. I know plenty of people that would be very envious of you for having it. But if you haven't purchased any other vintage watches, if you're not looking for any other vintage watches, that does lead me to believe that it's possible you're not a vintage watch guy. So if you're not a vintage watch guy, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, then I would recommend sell the Explorer. It's certainly taking up plenty of cash. Let's say $13,000 to $16,000 that could be put towards something you enjoy more. Now that being said, I really think you want to dive a little bit deeper into the world of vintage watches and what makes their history so interesting. You seem to be a guy that loves a story. So with the right research, and I'll help you do that, I think you will fall in love with that Explorer completely if you haven't already. Now, the final one space in the watch box, which I do believe could be split into two. That's the hot horology sports watch. And while I love your 36mm yellow gold AP, I do recommend you sell it to help fund this category. Now you can go two ways here. You can go with the AP Royal Oak white gold salmon dial, which it seems like you have a shot at getting, which is unbelievable. It's a limited edition piece and I would highly recommend it. So that's one way, white metal. And if you do go with this white gold AP Royal Oak, I might have to ask you to consider to move on from your Patek Aquanuat. I love both watches, I really do. But if you're gonna have two gold watches, I think that at least one of them needs to be yellow or rose, which I believe is a category on its own. And when I say a gold watch, while I love white gold, it doesn't scratch the same itch. I would look at this Patek. Have you considered the time-only Aquanuat in rose gold? It's a really phenomenal watch, certainly something that's on my list. And actually, if you sold your white gold Aquanuat and moved into the rose, you'd probably be putting somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000 back into your pocket. So if you do buy the AP and you still itch for a Patek and itch for a yellow or rose gold piece, I'd say it's fair if you move on from your 5 collection into a 6 watch collection. After all, 5 is a completely arbitrary number. Life is way too short to limit yourself, and it's not even an even number. So that's how I feel. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode. I had a blast looking at your collection and reading your story. It makes me so happy to meet immigrant American families that take such pride in their country, that use their country as a platform to build a wonderful, and in this case, very profitable life for themselves. Reading this email really did make my day. Thank you guys so much for watching. Buy watches, I guess. Comparable Rolexes, and it's really easily seen when you put it next to this next piece, is the dial. The particular finishing, like the lacquer that Rolex used here, is this matte blue that is, I think, absolutely brilliant. It's much more sporty. It's easier to look at, I think.